So in the next couple of lessons, we're going to look at human systems. So this is learning outcome 4. So by the end of this section of learning, students should be able to describe the structure, function, and interactions of the organs of the human digestive, circulatory, and respiratory systems. So that's the learning outcome. So the intentions then so we're going to look at learning about the functions of the part of the digestive system, and that's what we're going to look at in this lesson. Then we will look at the function and parts of the circulatory system, the functions and parts of the respiratory system, and then the interactions between all of these systems. So let's first look at this, what's called the digestive system. So if we think about the human body, so we know that the fundamental unit, if you like, of life is what's called a cell. And if we think about this cell, the first thing that it has is a membrane. Okay, so it has this outer membrane. And this membrane is made primarily from fats. So it has some fats, and it also has proteins as well. And it has some carbohydrates as well. So where do the fats, the proteins, and the carbohydrates come from? Well, we get them from our diet. So from the food that we eat. Okay, so the membrane, if you think about the fundamental unit of the cell, is the membrane, and it's made up of these nutrients of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And the membrane controls what goes in and out of it. Then inside it, we have this watery substance that's called cytoplasm. And cytoplasm is mainly made up of water. Okay, that's why it's important that we drink lots of water, because we need this internal water in order for all the chemical reactions that happen in the body to take place. If we think about inside the cell, then you have the nucleus. Okay, and the nucleus contains the DNA. Okay, and again, DNA is made up of, it has carbohydrates, and it has these base pairs as well. But again, the physical structure of the DNA, the building materials, they come from our diet. Then we have this really important, what are called mitochondrion. So it's like a section inside the cell. So mitochondrion, and this is the section of the cell that makes energy. Okay, and it's the part that makes energy, so it allows the cell it gives the energy that the cell needs in order to build the cell and keep the cell going. And if we think about the mitochondrion, what happens in and around the mitochondrion, we have this process of respiration. And if we remember, respiration is the release of energy from food. So you basically have glucose, okay, which we get from our diet, C6H12O6, plus oxygen, O2, which is plus O2. And then the body takes these nutrients and it turns it into carbon dioxide, which is CO2, and water, which is plus H2O. And then it releases this really important substance that we call energy, plus energy. And that energy the body uses to repair itself. It uses the energy to keep the body at a certain temperature. But this here, glucose, if you like, comes from your diet, and it comes through the digestive system. So we get glucose out of food. And then we're going to learn later about the breathing system. We get oxygen from the air, and we extract that using the breathing system. And then what happens is the circulatory system brings these nutrients to the cell and into the mitochondrion, and then it allows this process respiration to happen. So there's this interaction between all of these systems. So ultimately, why do we eat? Well, we need to keep these cells in good health, so they need the raw materials to keep them healthy. So they need, for example, the raw materials for the membrane to build the nucleus, to build the mitochondrion, and then there's other. And then we need water, for example, to keep, hydrated, and that means that it keeps the cells healthy. So in order for this reaction to happen, this chemical reaction, so these molecules physically have to come into contact with each other, and in order for them to come into contact with each other, they have to float around inside some kind of a liquid. Okay, and that's why the water is important. They physically come in contact with each other. So this is just kind of like why we eat and what we're taking from food when we eat. And now we're going to look at the digestive system. So the digestive system is all the parts that enable us to extract the things like fats and proteins and carbohydrates. And we also have vitamins and minerals from our diet. Okay, so that's what our digestive system is set up to do. So digestion then. So basically, what is digestion? So digestion is the breakdown of food into smaller molecules. So for example, if we take carbohydrates is where we get our, for example, like our glucose is what's called the carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are broken down into sugars and by enzymes like amylase, sucrose, isomerase, maltase, and lactase. So all of these like words that end in A's, basically what they are is they are these things called enzymes. And the way to kind of think about it is if you take like a piece of bread like this and you take a bite out of it, what you have is you have these like complicated structures like this. Okay, so these are like complicated carbohydrate structures. And basically, in order for your body to be able to make use of this, it has to break it down. So it has to break these bonds and break it down into simpler substances. And what they do in order to be able to do that, they use these special proteins that are called enzymes. And enzymes, you can think about them, they're like these proteins that basically help the body to break down the complicated carbohydrate, for example, into simpler compounds like glucose, C6H12O6. So we have, if you take amylase, for example, amylase is in the mouth, so it's in your saliva. So the minute you start chewing a piece of bread, the enzyme amylase starts to work on the complicated carbohydrate structure that's in the bread and starts breaking it down into this simpler like glucose molecule so your body can start to use it. So enzymes are themselves, they are what are called proteins. And what they do is they help us to digest. So basically digest means to take these like long complicated molecules and break them down into simpler forms that your body can use. So like for example, we take a piece of bread, we chew the bread, and what happens is all of these enzymes start to break down the molecules that are in the bread into simpler molecules that our body can start to use to build and repair itself. And in the case of carbohydrates, we can use the carbohydrates, for example, to get glucose, and then we can use that glucose to get and release energy from it for the body. So food molecules need to be small enough to enter the bloodstream. So for example, they have to get into the blood. Food molecules are needed for growth and repair in the body. So like what we've said here. So basically at a fundamental level, we're made up of cells, and those cells need to be repaired. So they need a constant source of fats and proteins and carbohydrates and vitamins and minerals in order to keep them healthy. So they're constantly kind of breaking down and then being repaired by the body. So starchy foods are broken down into sugars for energy. So we take starch. Proteins, okay, so if we take proteins like meat, for example, protein foods are broken down into these things called amino acids, which we need for growth. Okay, so proteins are broken down. So if we take a bite of a piece of chicken, inside the chicken we have these protein molecules. And if you look at these individual parts of the protein molecules, they are called amino acids. And then what happens is the body has special enzymes, okay, so special enzymes that are used to break down proteins into these simple building blocks, which are called amino acids. And then the body then can take those amino acids and it can use it to build different parts of the cell structure. So proteins are broken down into amino acids, and then fats are broken down into molecules used for energy and for heat insulation as well. So if we take, for example, oil, like if you take cod liver oil, it has these fat molecules, and we have these special enzymes that break down fat molecules called lipase, and it breaks it down into these fatty acids. And then the body can use these fatty acids to build, for example, the cell membrane. So what your body is doing through digestion, it's taking the things that you eat, it's breaking it down into its fundamental parts, it's taking those fundamental parts and it's building your body with it and keeping your body repaired with it. That's why it's important to have a healthy diet. It's important to get the right amount of nutrients, otherwise your body will not be healthy because it will not have the building blocks or the raw material it needs in order to repair itself and to keep energy, to keep the body warm. And this is an ongoing process. Your body needs to constantly consume food in order for it to be able to stay healthy. So this, for example, the breakfast you eat in the morning becomes you in the evening. We need to know the parts of the digestive system and basically the function of each of the parts of the digestive system. So inside your body, you can't see it. The only parts you can see of your digestive system are your mouth. And inside your body, you have this whole complex system that has different parts, and those parts all work together in order to take food, break it down, and extract the molecules that the body needs. So if we take, for example, so the first part where digestion starts is in the mouth. So inside your mouth, it breaks down food with teeth and enzymes. So you have two types of digestion. Okay, so you have what's known as, so if we take digestion, and di means like two, so it's essentially like breaking things into parts. So digestion, you have these two types of digestion. You have physical digestion, okay, and that's like physically where your teeth, for example, break down. If we take like a piece of food, physical digestion breaks it down into these smaller parts. And then we have what's known as chemical digestion. Chemical digestion. And chemical digestion, it takes these smaller parts and it breaks it down into individual like components, for example, into individual molecules. So you have physical digestion happens in the mouth with the teeth breaking it down, and then you have chemical digestion happening in the mouth when the enzymes are acting on the food that's in your mouth. And then when it goes into the stomach, there's acid in your stomach, and that chemically breaks down the food even more. And also your stomach churns the food. Okay, so that also, there's an element of physical digestion as well. So it's important to know like what we mean by physical digestion and what we mean by chemical digestion. So in the mouth, you have physical digestion by the teeth breaking it down, and then the saliva gland pumps saliva into these glands, pump saliva into your mouth, and that saliva breaks down the food even more using enzymes, and that's chemical digestion. So then what happens then is once it's chewed up enough, then what can happen is it can start to be transported down into the stomach for more digestion. So we have this long muscular tube called the esophagus, and it carries food to the stomach. Okay, so it carries food down through this long muscular tube that brings the food down into the stomach. So inside the stomach then, it's full of acid, and what the stomach does is it kills bacteria and it breaks down proteins. So the acid kills off anything that might have got onto your food from the outside world, and then it also starts to break down the proteins and chemically digest it. Then we have the next kind of organ of the digestive system, which is the liver, and the liver produces bile, and bile then is used to break down fats. Then you have the pancreas here, and what will happen is that the partially digested food in the stomach starts to move down through here, and the liver adds bile to it, and the pancreas starts to add enzymes to it, and we get further digestion that starts to happen. And then what will happen is the food then will pass down into this what's called the small intestine. So it's this long muscular tube. And basically what starts to happen is the small intestine passes food molecules to the bloodstream. So once it's sufficiently digested by the stomach and the liver and the pancreas, the food, what starts to happen is the pancreas then, the food gets passed down into the small intestine, and then what it starts to do is it starts to be transported into the bloodstream, and then the bloodstream brings the nutrients all over the body. So the small intestine passes food molecules to the bloodstream, and then once all of the nutrients are taken out of your food, for example, and all that's left is waste, then the body starts to get rid of that waste, and it starts to pass the parts of the food that your body can't use, and it passes it into what's known as the large intestine. So the large intestine reabsorbs water into the blood and stores waste. Okay, so basically the food that can't be digested is stored in this long muscular tube called the large intestine. Any excess water is taken out, and that's reabsorbed back into the body. And then what happens is once that waste, or what's called feces, is produced, then that is expelled out of the body through the rectum and through the anus. And that's basically your body getting rid of the parts of the food that it can't digest. So again, it's very important that you know each part of the digestive system, and then you know the functions of each part of the digestive system as well. So if we look at these parts in a little bit of detail, so inside the mouth, so this is what it looks like inside the mouth. So digestion begins in the mouth. So mechanical digestion is the physical breakdown of food, mostly by the teeth. So your teeth start to break down and chew up the food. So you have the teeth then have unique functions as well. So you have the incisor teeth, which are these teeth at the front. They're sometimes called the canine teeth. The incisors are these guys here at the front of the mouth. And what they do is they're kind of like chisels, and they basically they cut the food, or they take off pieces of food. So if you take your front teeth and these teeth down here, so these are what are known as your incisor teeth. The canine teeth then, because we are what are called omnivores and we eat meat, we use the canine teeth to tear food. Okay, so canines rip and tear food. Then you have the premolars, which are these guys here. They crush and grind the food. So you'll notice that they have a flat surface for grinding down the food. And then the molars then at the back, then they are used to crush and grind down the food. So essentially what you have is you have this physical digestion by the teeth, and it chews your food and breaks it down. Now what's happened then is in your mouth, saliva is being added to your food all the time, and chemical digestion is the use of enzymes to break down chemical bonds in food molecules. So if you take, for example, starch, the enzymes will start to break the bonds between these starch in the starch molecule. You get a chemical reaction, and what happens is this complicated starch molecule gets broken down into simpler sugars then that the body can use. Enzymes are proteins made by the body which control the rate of a chemical reaction in the body. So enzymes can speed up or slow down chemical reactions, and so the breaking down of the starch is a chemical reaction, and the presence of enzymes speeds up that process. Saliva contains the enzyme called amylase, which breaks down starch down into smaller molecules of maltose sugar. So the next parts then are the esophagus and the stomach. So food is pushed along the esophagus to the stomach by waves of muscular contraction known as peristalsis. So basically, if you think about, so you have this tube, and you have let's say chewed up like you've a chewed up piece of food like this. And what happens is this muscle, it kind of like it squeezes together and it forces the food down a little bit more. Okay, so the food will be here and then it kind of pushes it down again. And then it moves down. So what will happen is it'll kind of squeeze in and it'll like if you're squeezing, for example, toothpaste out of a tube of toothpaste, that's basically what happens. And this is like a muscular movement and it's called peristasis, and the body needs energy in order to be able to do that. So that's how the food gets from your mouth down through the esophagus down into your stomach. So in the stomach, proteins are digested into smaller molecules by enzymes called pepsin. Okay, so inside the stomach you have these enzymes called pepsin, and then you also have this acid called hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and it kills bacteria and allows pepsin to work best as well. So inside the stomach, the chewed up food gets down into the stomach, and then straight away the acid in the stomach starts to break it down. And you also have enzymes called pepsin, which is used to break down proteins that are in the food. So the next parts then are the liver and the gallbladder. So after food leaves the stomach, so it leaves the stomach and it starts to go down here, juices from the pancreas and the liver, so the liver starts pumping in its juices in, and the pancreas produces enzymes to digest the foods further. So this is the pancreas here. The pancreas produces maltase, so again it produces another enzyme which breaks down maltose sugar into even smaller glucose molecules. And if we remember, here, so this is glucose. So this is what the body will use to carry out respiration and to make energy for the body. So so the maltose sugar is broken down into even simpler molecules of sugar called glucose, and the body uses this glucose then to make energy. So the liver then, it produces bile, which helps to neutralize the acid from the stomach. So again, there's going to be acid here in the food and it needs to be neutralized using bile from the stomach. And bile is stored in the gallbladder. So you have this bile that's stored in here. This is like a sac that's attached onto the liver and it's full of this gallbladder. So bile also helps to break up clumps of fat into smaller pieces, which then can be broken down by enzymes. And these fatty acids, they basically go and they make the membrane. They're transported to cells and they're used by cells to make the membranes of all the cells in the body. So that's the pancreas and the liver. So the food then passes into what's called the small intestine. So digestion continues in the small intestine, and the small intestine is surrounded by many blood vessels to absorb small food molecules. The inner lining is heavily folded with projections called villi to increase the surface area for absorbing food, and these food molecules then are carried all around the body. So the food molecules have been extracted from the food, they're pushed into the bloodstream, and then they're transported around the body by the bloodstream to where they're needed. So in the intestine, if you look at the surface inside the intestine, it looks like this. So you have these folds that are called villi, and then inside these villi, then you have these tiny capillaries or blood vessels where the digested food molecules can pass from the inside of the intestine into the bloodstream, and then they're pumped all around the body by the bloodstream. So, and this happens in the small intestine. So then whatever's left then passes into the large intestine. So in the large intestine, water is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream to prevent dehydration. so we reabsorb water back into the blood. Foods high in fiber, such as fruit, help the food waste to move along the large intestine and prevent constipation. That's why it's important to eat fiber. It helps to keep this large intestine emptied out. The waste, called feces, is stored in the rectum before being released through the anus. Feces contains food material that the body has not broken down any further, and the removal of feces from the body is called egestion. Okay, so digestion is the breaking down of food, and then egestion is the removal of food from the body. So that is the human digestive system. So students should be able to describe the structure. So we looked at the structure of the human digestive system. And we looked at the function of each of the parts of the human digestive system. And then we looked at the interactions of the organs of the human digestive system with the circulatory system and the breathing system. So we looked at basically how food, when it's broken down, is absorbed into the circulatory system or into the blood system. And then how, for example, the glucose is combined with oxygen, and that oxygen is taken in from the air through the respiratory system, through the breathing system, and we look at that in more detail in a subsequent lesson. Okay, so that is the human digestive system.